Well, it's been, I think, like 2 or 3 weeks since we had the last King Gizzard album, so it's about time to have another one. The band that cannot sit down, the one that really does push the limits of how much music can we put in a year, has done it again. 4 albums in 1 year. So yeah, let's listen to the latest one from King Giz. Let's dive in. Come get a message to my brain, I can't control myself anymore. Changes from King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. So, I already covered King Gizzard a couple weeks ago with their 1-2 punch of Ice Death and blah, 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 as well as Laminated Denim. And I ended up liking both of those. I think I liked Laminated Denim just a little bit more, just, it was kind of playing off of the whole Timeland theme and whatnot, kind of all based around this one beat that kept playing. And Ice Death was fine. I think they just kind of, they took what was going on with the dripping tap from Gargantuum Onerum, I think it is. Onerum Gargantuum, something like that. The first album that they put out this year. And really built around that and created like this really big jam album, which it's fine. With a band that put out 4 albums this year, you're going to get varying quality, but it's all good. You can't really go wrong. So Changes is their final album when they, talked right after releasing Omnium Gatherum we still have 3 more albums in the tank before the year is done. And now we get Changes. And at first, when I first sat down and listened to Changes, I thought that they had basically took the jamming sessions that they had done with the Dripping Tap and Ice Death, really polished everything that was going on with those two projects, and came out with this. But honestly, I was a little bit wrong, because they had been playing around with this idea since the 5 album release from 2017, and this was supposed to be what Gumboot Soup eventually became. They were really playing with this one major chord progression that then spiraled into this bigger song that was, again, going to be released as one single track. But then they started to really, as King Gizzard does, go off on tangents, really playing around with themes, really playing around with the ideas that they were constructing. And then they had a full album on their hand. So they've been playing around with this pretty much since 2017, putting little touches here and there. We have the final piece here. So we've got 7 tracks across 40 minutes of music. And I gotta say it. This might be my favorite project from King Gizzard since Polygon Wonderland. I have been loving this album. I really, really have. And after Laminated Denim that came out just a couple weeks ago, I thought that was the best one that they put out since Fishing for Fishies. And this one I can say is probably my second favorite album from them so far. I've been really, really loving this album, and it probably is just because of the amount of fun style playing that they have on here, because they have rooted this album in this whole note progression sequence and really use that as a unifying feature on it. It feels very unified. It feels like a very solid start to finish album in that sense. It doesn't feel like a collection of tracks that have just been put down. It also doesn't feel like a full experiment that King Gizzard will sometimes put out, like the microtonal albums that they put out with KG and LW. This one feels very, very unified. It starts off with the 13-minute changes that really does open up this album extremely well. And right off the get-go, I am reminded of so many different prog aspects and prog sequences that made me fall in love with progressive rock right from the beginning. The main sequence that I really do love, and is one that is brought about quite often on tracks like Hate Dancin' and AstroTurf, is the use of this electric piano and synthesizer to root the track in place. It's reminded me of a lot of the sound sequences that we would hear with bands like Supertramp that use this style of playing to play around with ideas and forms and really breathe this whole new context into the music. It's reminded me of a lot of that more kind of poppy prog that we would get from the latter half of the 70s, but infused in this really jammy, really fun and complex sequencing. So I'm skipping around a little bit, but Changes opens up this album just beautifully. And it's reminding me of a lot of the sound sequences that we would get for like Paper Mache Dream Balloon or Sketches from East Brunswick, that very pastel style of playing. But the thing that I really particularly love about the playing styles on this one is how well the drums are used as well. They're just adding a little bit of sequencing, and I love where they are in the mix as well, being very forefront, even though there's not a whole lot going on. Like the top hats that I'm listening to this are just so crystal clear that I can almost taste the vibrations in the air as they're hitting my eardrums. And combined with this is that very airy guitar licks that are found on here. You know, it almost feels as though they're barely even touching the strings as they're plucking away on here. It's just so light. It's so airy. Like you can breathe in this music and get lost in the fold in that sense. And with all of that, I love the experimentation of the sounds that are on here. You know, it's not like forefront within the experimentation. There's just like accents going on just to kind of feel things out. We've got like a wisp here within the synthesizers, or a wisp here within the production work, just to kind of keep things interesting and to keep things very, very like low key. Now, on top of that, I also love the actual chord progression, the actual progression of this track going forward. Like, I love how, even though it's very airy and very light, when we get into like the mid half of this track, it starts to get a little bit more heavy. It starts to get a little bit more lively. We have a lot more of this celebration of sounds that is then continued with Hate Dancing. And Hate Dancing starts off with that very prominent, very astute, like electric piano sounds that I'm still getting massive flavors of Supertramp on here. That's just, it's begging me to listen to Crisis with Crisis. I'm loving that really beautiful harmonizations that we have on here that brings us through the music overall. And it's very jamming. It's very optimistic. And I love just how happy everything sounds on this track as well. And then we come into AstroTurf, the third track. I'm really, really enjoying how they set things up and then they pay it off. Like AstroTurf might be one of my favorite tracks I've heard from King Giz in a very, very long time, because the moment that I thought, oh man, I think they're playing a little too long in this, they change things up just enough and then bring about this beautiful, beautiful crescendo, especially when we have that burr, 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 bah. And it goes into the final play out of this track, and it just always makes me gush. And I also just love, now that I'm kind of in the mid section, I can talk about how these tracks flow from one to the other to the other. Like the first three tracks of Changin', Hate Dancin', and AstroTurf do flow very, very seamlessly beside one another. We get into No Body, Gandhi, Exploding Suns, and the last track of Short Change. And once again, we have this very seamless, very almost as though it's one track as the second half. And I love how there's almost contrasts to these. Like No Body is very ethereal, very impressionistic, again, very pastel in that sense, very mellow, very come as you may. And Gandhi is very astute. It's very prominent. It's very immediate in its presentation. I love how the beat from the synths root this track in place. And man, those synths on this track are just so juicy, and I love the combination of the soundscapes that they're able to provide, as well as the overall rhythm section that's found on here. Like, there's not a whole lot of guitars found on this track, and I really love how they've syncopated all these synths into this one track that just bleed this brilliance. It's reminding me of some of the better parts from AstroTurf that I'm really, really loving. And with Exploding Suns, that's where the guitars come back, and I'm getting this very like Gilmour-esque guitar licks, like that very bluesy guitar works that are on this one. It really screams and soars very high in the mixing on this one. And it leaves space as well, so that you can really take in the guitar licks, really take into the guitar moments to allow us to really appreciate and think about, what's all going on. So we had, the very astute and very grounded Gandhi into the Exploding Suns that, again, is very ethereal, very soundscapey, that then goes right into the final track of Short Change, which once again is very... I don't want to say techno, but very electronic. It's very astute. It's very granular in that sense. Love how this album is all tied together with just this explosion of Short Change. And I got to bring it back to that drumming work. Like, I love the drumming work on this album. Really knocked it out of the park. So, in the end, as I've alluded to, this album is a knockout. I've been really, really digging this album. I keep returning to it again and again and again. And I have a feeling this will be the album from this year of King Gizzard that I'll be returning to the most going forward. Because, yeah, this is probably, as I've mentioned from the top here, my favorite album from them since Polywan Gondoland. I've really, really been loving it. I've been returning to it quite a bit. And yeah, so I'll say that Changes from King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard is one that I absolutely love with my whole heart. I think this is a great introduction to the band. It has some of their best music. And you can tell like the band didn't necessarily sit on this because they didn't know when to release it or didn't know whether or not to release it. This is an album that had been really lovingly cared for so that when the time came that the final touches were finally laid onto it, they could usher it forth into the world. And yeah, as I mentioned, this is one that I'm going to be returning to quite regularly. I think that this is the best album of this year, and I'm glad that they saved the best for last. So, yeah, that's what I've got for King Giz and the Lizard Wizard with Changes. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And I think that's all I've got for you guys today. So, thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.